My name is Vojtech, and I built a library. It's a sortable list. You can drag and drop each item and change its position. And today, I am going to tell you a story about why I decided to build this library from scratch, and also what I learned in the process. There are 4 different chapters: how to make it work, accessible, pretty, and reliable. But first, a short introduction. I do open source JavaScript at Uber. Most of my time I spend building a component library called BaseWeb. It's an implementation of our design system, and we use it across all applications. It's open source, so check it out. I think it's pretty cool. If you don't believe me, we got some lovely reviews from Hacker News. But back to drag and drop. Does anybody know when it was first introduced? Like, any guesses? How many years ago? It's very old. It was created by Jeff Raskin in 1970s, and it was called click and drop. If you never heard this name before, it's the leader behind the Macintosh project. So drag and drop is as old as first graphical user interfaces. It's 2019. How come that making things draggable on web is still so painful? In December 2018, it was a beautiful sunny morning. I came to work, opened our Jira board, and there was an unassigned ticket: build a sortable list. And it looks pretty simple on the surface, right? But each component in our system has some strict requirements. It needs to be customizable. You should be able to update any style. It needs to be accessible. You should be able to control this component only with keyboard and screen reader. It needs to be mobile friendly. The size is very important too, because many of our teams have strict bundle size budgets. And of course, React. So first, I looked into existing solutions. And there are many great options in React ecosystem. By far, the best one is React Beautiful DND. It focuses on lists, it's accessible, mobile-friendly, very polished, and it has many features. Actually, too many features for us, and that results in a significant size. There is React Sortable HOC. It's much smaller, but not very accessible, and it's kind of hard to style it. And I also have to mention React DND. This library doesn't really focus on lists. It tries to cover all kinds of drag and drop experiences. It also takes a very different approach in terms of implementation. It's using a different set of APIs, and that comes with some limitations, like the support for mobile isn't great. Also, the styling of direct items is kind of hard. So what's the conclusion here? React Beautiful DND is pretty damn good. But 32 kilobytes, that's a hefty price for us to pay. So can we build something smaller and simpler? And that's how it started. Let's make it work. First thing first, let's do some Googling, what tools we can use. So you type drag and drop MDN into Google, and the first answer is pretty promising. HTML drag and drop interfaces enable applications to use drag and drop features in Firefox and other browsers. Bingo, sounds awesome. So you open it and start reading. There are some events, 8 different events. Like, wait a minute. Why do I need 8 different events for something that you can describe by 3 different actions? User presses the mouse button, moves the mouse, releases the button. And then I kept reading more. And it turns out this whole API is a hot mess. It lacks support for mobile devices. It has limited previews for drag items. It's widely inconsistent across browsers, and the API is very confusing. Half of these events are completely useless, but you still have to implement them to cancel some strange side effects. So now you might wonder, how come this API is so bad? It was introduced pretty recently, and the answer might surprise you. It's based on IE6. So whatever IE6 implemented it at the time was used as a base for this API. Yeah, so IE6, it's long dead, but it still keeps our lives miserable. If you want to look into more details, Quirks Mode has some great opinions too. So what do you do when the native API is crap? You can abstract it into a library and try to fix it. And that's exactly what React DND is doing. And it's actually doing a very good job. It provides a reasonable and consistent API that works across browsers. But some limitations are so severe that you are still not getting a good support for mobile or to style direct items. So what else you can do? If you don't want to use this API and you want to support mobile, well, the answer is all good mouse and touch events. There are 3 of them: mouse down, mouse move, mouse up, and there are also touch counterparts. So now we can support mobile as well. And this nicely maps into what we need, right? 3 actions, 3 events. That's nice. So we can track actions. Now we also need the position of mouse. No problem. All these events come with X and Y values. We also need to measure things. There's this API, get bounding client rect. It's a horrible name, but it's a great API. You can measure any element on the page and get its dimensions and precise location. So we can track actions, measure things. We also need to position elements. When the user is dragging the item, we need to move it. And this is the first naive solution you can use. You can apply position fixed. And as the user moves the item, you can keep updating top and left values. And this works pretty well. But there is a better solution. Instead of top and left values, you can use CSS Transform Translate. This thing is much faster because it's using GPU instead of CPU. You can also combine it with transition duration if you want to animate. There are some other useful DOM APIs. For example, if you want to deal with scrolling or with even better performance. I also have to mention this React API. It's called Create Portal. You probably know it. It's the way how you can render children into a DOM node that exists outside of the parent component. So in this example, we are taking a list item, and we render it at the bottom of the document body. Why do we do this thing? The answer is we want to make our positioning reliable. If this item is at the top of the DOM tree, there is nothing else that could impact its positioning and its styling. You can see this API used quite often for things like models or tooltips. All right, so we have all the pieces. We can track the actions, we can measure things, we can move elements around. Now we just need to put it together into a single algorithm. It starts on the left side. User clicks on the second item and starts moving it. What we do, we set its visibility to hidden. That means the item is now invisible, but it still takes the same space. And it doesn't impact positions of other items. And at the same time, we use Create Portal to render this item at the bottom of the document body. We give it initial top and left position that matches original position. And as user keeps moving it, we just keep updating transform value. On the right side, user reached the boundary of third item. So we need to make switch now. How to do that? We set transform with negative y value to the third item. We also use transition to animate it. As you can see, we still haven't changed the order of DOM elements. That's something we will do once user releases the item. There are many ways how you could implement this, but this one is pretty simple and works. All right, let's talk about accessibility. You should be able to use this component only with your keyboard and screen reader. Let me show you how this works. First, you tap to focus an item. And you get this message from screen reader. Item 1, you are currently at the draggable item at position 1. Press spacebar to list 6 items. So now you know this is a special list. You can take any item and you can lift it and start moving it. So let's hit spacebar. The next message follows. You have lifted item at position 1. Press J to move down, K to move up, spacebar to drop, and escape to cancel. So now you have multiple options. Let's press J to move it down. You have moved the lifted item down to position 2. Press J to move down, K to move up, spacebar to drop, and escape to cancel. So finally, we hit spacebar again to confirm this operation. And the final message follows. You have dropped the item. It moved from position 1 to 2. So now you can use this component even if you don't see it or even if you don't have mouse. How to implement this? There is no special accessibility drag and drop API. But what you can do is setting ARIA row description to each item. So you can announce that this is a special item, and you can take actions like hitting spacebar. And then you can use this API called LifeRegion, and you can push arbitrary messages to screen reader. So whatever I set into this div, it gets announced by the screen reader immediately. So even very complex interactions can be accessible. Let's make it pretty. There are many little things you might not even notice, but they make the whole interaction nicer. I just want to point out 2 of them. The first one is the drop animation. On the left side, there is none. So when the last item is released, it just reappears at the bottom of list. On the right side, there is an animation, so item flies back. And that gives users some additional feedback, which is nice. If we slow down this thing, we can also discuss different timing functions. On the left side, it uses linear timing function. So the item flies back at a constant speed. On the right side, it starts very quick, and then it slows down at the end. And that feels more natural. How to do this? The transition property has a second argument where you can pass a timing function. And with cubic Bezier and a little bit of math, you can define any timing function you want. And this is the second thing. When to do the switch. On the left side is the initial application. We are tracking the mouse, and when it reaches the boundaries of the 4th item, we make the switch. So we need to move the 5th item just a little bit, and it already triggers the switch. And it just feels way too early. On the right side, we are using the center of the 5th item instead. So now you need to move it more to make the switch. And again, it just feels better. So let's take a look at API of this component. It's pretty simple. There are just 2 props you have to implement. First, you need to pass it an array of items. And then when an item is wrapped, you have to reorder this array. But then I was thinking, this works pretty well, but we put a lot of effort into this library. Maybe this could be used for other use cases. how about I want to use it for tables, not even lists? That would be nice. Or what if I have really long list and I also want to add auto-scrolling? And that's how react-movable library was born. So now you don't need to use our component library. You can use react-movable, and you can build your own sortable experience on the top of it. The question is, how would you improve the previous API to make it more flexible? And there are kind of three ways in React how to do it. You can use higher order components. I don't really like them, because they create these hidden prop relationships. And it's also very hard to statically type them. You can use hooks, but they were not released yet. And also, honestly, I think if you are rendering actual elements, like RenderProbs is very nice and concise API. So RenderProbs it is. And this is the new API. So we are adding just two new props. RenderList, where we can define our container element. And we just need to spread some props over it to make it work. And the same thing with RenderItem. And this code actually works. So if you copy-paste it into your project, you get this nice, non-fancy list. But it has accessibility, it's animated, you can use it with your keyboard. So yeah, it's pretty simple and it works. Right, make it reliable. What do I mean by that? It's test coverage. This library uses a lot of DOM APIs. So if you are thinking about unit tests, you would have to mock a lot of APIs. And what are you testing at that point? So it might be a better idea to use end-to-end tests. With Puppeteer, you can write nice descriptive tests, like this one. It's testing the full interaction with mouse. So you move mouse, you press button, you move mouse more, you release the button, and then you check the order of elements in the DOM. And the same thing with keyboard. Instead of moving mouse, you are just pressing different keys. Tab, space, arrow down, space. And again, you check the order of items. But then I saw another class of bugs when I was implementing this component. The order can be correct, but maybe some positioning is slightly off. And that happens a lot when you are animating things and moving them around. How to catch this bug? You can add visual regression testing with just image snapshot. How does it work? First, you take a screenshot of your working component, and when you run tests again, it creates another screenshot and compares them together. If there are differences, you get this nice diff, and the test fails. So now you can ensure pixel-perfect positioning. OK, so library is tested. Let's ship it. Not so fast. There is still Internet Explorer. I opened browser stack, fired up IE, and everything is in shambles. You just see like a big red wall of errors, nothing works. Fortunately, it's not so bad. There are just some APIs you need to avoid. Around scrolling, there is this strange bug with transform translate that doesn't work for table rows, but it's nothing major. You can still make it work. All right, fixed, let's ship it. And then I open it on my iPhone. And this one is much worse. If you think about it, the gesture for drag and drop is exactly the same as the gesture for touch scrolling. How to fix this? Well, let's just disable touch scrolling. Fortunately, there is a CSS property for that. It's called CSS, it's called touch action, and you can set it to none. And it just disables touch scrolling. And it works in all browsers, except iOS Safari. All right, so what do you do when a CSS fails you? You just use more JavaScript. So how about if we call PreventDefault on all these touch events? And that works, that's the solution. Except there is another glitch. In 2017, Chrome decides to break the web, and they launched the intervention. What is it? So all touch events started ignoring PreventDefault calls by default. And Safari did the same thing quickly after. Why did they do that? To improve the scrolling performance. Now the browser doesn't need to check if there is a PreventDefault call. Great. So if you want to make the PreventDefault work, you need to mark your listener as not passive. And there is an argument for that. So you just add it there, and now you can use PreventDefault. Cool. Unless you use ReactEvent system. Turns out there is still no support to make React events not passive. So what's the final solution here? Forget React event system and just go native. And what's the conclusion? What's the result of all of this? It's a 4 kilobyte library. So we reached all our goals. It's accessible, mobile friendly, customizable, and it's also 10 times smaller. So let's wrap this up. If you don't want to use HTML5 API, and you should not because it doesn't support mobile, use mouse and touch events instead. For positioning, transform translate works really fast. There are many useful DOM APIs, like getBounding client rect for measuring things. Don't try to use React events or mix them with native events, just go fully native. Even very complex interactions can be accessible if you use LifeRegions. And for testing, consider Puppeteer. And there's one more thing. The sortable list isn't the only component that uses drag and drop. We also built React Range for sliders. And it has very similar API. It's using same principles. So you can also fully customize it. It's also accessible. It also works on phones. If you have any feedback for me, I'll be around. You can also reach me on Twitter. And there's one more thing I want to show you. It's something we are working on. It's called React View. It's not released yet, but I'll show you a short demo. It's an interactive playground, documentation, and code generator in a single component. So it has 3 parts. At the top, you can see our sortable list component, and you can play with it. Then the middle part are props, the API you can use. And you can actually edit it. And you can see it edits the component. I can edit it also here. And when I drag and drop items around, it changes the order here as well. And at the same time, it also keeps updating this code snippet. So I can just copy-paste it and use it in my application. And this code snippet is also live editable. So I can just add a new item right here. And yeah, it's here too. So we think this is a great way how to document React components, and it should be released pretty soon. Thank you. That's all.